Hey there, brothers and sisters. We're here to read and take in a word for the day, a meal for the day, something to chew on. And I'm going to read to you today from Samuel chapter 14. Jonathan was a dear friend of David. Their souls were knit together. And yet, on many occasions, David wrote in the Psalms how his dearest friend, how the one who his soul is knit to, had betrayed him, had turned him over. And we know that many times Saul's army found David when it's possible that Jonathan was the only one that knew where his troops were. So today, that isn't about the lesson that we want to learn today. Today, we're going to read about honoring those whom God says we must honor. Now, I want you to keep in mind that Saul, King Saul, Jonathan's father, was a foolish king, maybe the most foolish king. God withdrew his spirit from Saul, took back the anointing to such a degree that Saul lost his mind. Saul would go crazy, completely lose his mind. And yet, God expects his commandments, his word, to be followed when he says, honor your mother and your father. Let's see what happens today. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young man that bore his armor, Come, and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he didn't tell his father. He decided he wanted to be a hero, something like David. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree which is in Migron. And the people that were with him were about 600 men. And Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. So Saul is here hanging out under this pomegranate tree during the day. He's got about 600 soldiers with him. He's got the priest with him. They're waiting for the Lord's commandment. And Jonathan tells to his armor bearer, hey, let's sneak off and let's go lay waste to the Philistines. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over unto the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And the name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Sinah. The forefront of the one was situated northward against Michmash, and the other southward against Gibeah. And Jonathan said to the young man that bore his armor, Come, and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. Now that part, Jonathan is correct. He said, let's go over and let's lay waste to the Philistines. And it may be that God is with us, because it doesn't matter to God if he has one soldier or 1,000 soldiers. If God decides that they die today, then they die today. And his armor bearer said unto him, Do all that is in thine heart. Turn thee. Behold, I am with thee according to thy heart. Then said Jonathan, Behold, we will pass over unto these men. We will discover ourselves unto them. He says, we'll show ourselves to them. And if they say unto us, Tarry until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and will not go up unto them. But if they say unto us, Come up unto us, then we will go up, for the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this shall be a sign unto us. And both of them discovered themselves. They showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, Behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they have hid themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, Come up to us, and we'll show you something. And Jonathan said unto his armor bearer, Come up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel. And Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor bearer after them, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after him. So Jonathan climbed up in his armor, and as he cut these Philistines, as he cut them, as he shot them with arrows, as he threw his spear, and these guys fell wounded, the armor bearer came behind Jonathan and did the coup de grace. He was killing them off. And that first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made was about 20 men, within, as it were, a half an acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. And there was a trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled. And the earth quaked, so it was a great trembling. And the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. Another translation of that says, Saul's lookout men in Gibeah of Benjamin could see, and lo, the Philistine camp melted away hither and there. It was falling apart. Then said Paul unto the people that were with him, Number now and see who is gone from us. He's saying, look around us and see who is missing from our group. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. And Saul said to Ahiah, Bring hither the ark of God, for the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. And it came to pass, while Saul talked unto the priests, that the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. The tumult, the yelling to each other in the host of the Philistines got louder and louder. And Saul said unto the priest, Withdraw thy hand. And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle. And behold, everyone's sword was against his fellow. The Philistines had come to blows, friend turning sword against friend. That's what that trembling is about. And there was a great discomfiture. So the Philistines are fighting amongst themselves now. They don't understand what's happened. They've been turned against each other somehow, and they're having a battle. Moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. So there had been some Hebrews there with the Philistines. They abandoned the Philistines, and they came out and joined the Israelites. Likewise, all the men of Israel, which had hid themselves in Mount Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. So there's these people who had lived in the mountains around. They all came out for the plunder. When the Philistines were running, they came out to slaughter the Philistines and take advantage of the situation and get what they could. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Beth-aven. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had bound the people, saying, so Paul had bound the people prior to all this happening, prior to Jonathan going up. Paul had bound the people and said, Cursed be the man that eats any food until evening, so that I may be avenged upon my enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. None of the people had eaten. Now remember, Jonathan had left before Saul had made this announcement. And Jonathan was right with God. And he had gone up, and God was obviously with him. He killed 20 men, and the Philistine army caved in on itself, started fighting amongst themselves, and the Hebrews who had been amongst the Philistines as supporters, as allies, left them, came out, joined the Israelites. And all they of the land came to a wood. So they're chasing these Philistines, and they come to this place where there's a forest. And there was honey upon the ground. And when the people were come into the wood, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not been there when King Saul made that commandment, that if anybody eats today, they'd be cursed, they'd lose their life. So Jonathan had not heard when his father charged the people with the oath. Wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it into a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened up. Then answered one of the people and said, Then one of the people spoke to Jonathan and said, Your father straitly charged the people with an oath, saying, Cursed be the man that eats any food this day. and all these people that have been chasing the Philistines are faint with hunger. They've got no strength. They've run for miles. They've chased the Philistines. They've been fighting. They've been slaughtering the enemy, and they're faint with hunger. And Jonathan said, My father has troubled the land. My father has done the nation a disservice. See, I pray you, how my eyes have been opened, brightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more, if haply the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For had there not been a much greater slaughter among the Philistines? What he's saying is, if everybody had been able to eat from the food which they found as they took over the Philistine camp, if everybody had been able to eat, how much greater a blow we might have struck, because everybody would have had strength. Now, granted, it was Saul's foolishness to make this thing that everybody would have to fast today. He didn't even consult the priest before he made that statement. And and here's everybody in the heat of a battle. They can't eat anything. They can't eat a thing. Now, Jonathan had two choices. He could have stopped right there and said, Oh, I did not know. I'll honor my father's wishes. But instead, he spoke to all the people about how foolish his father was and how things could have turned out differently if his father hadn't been so foolish to make that proclamation. And they smote the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very faint. The people were starving, they're ravished, they hadn't eaten, but they continued to fight all the hours of daylight until they slew all these Philistines, and the people flung themselves upon the spoil, and they took sheep and oxen and calves, and they slew them on the ground, and the people did eat them with the blood. Then they told Saul, saying, Behold, the people sin against the Lord, in that they eat with the blood. And he says, You have transgressed. Roll a great stone unto me this day. And Saul said, Disperse yourselves among the people, and say, Bring me hither every man with an ox, and every man with a sheep, and slay them here, and eat. And sin not against the Lord in eating with the blood. And all the people brought every man with him an ox that night, and slew them there. And Saul built an altar unto the Lord. The same was the first altar that he built unto the Lord. And Saul said, Let us go down after the Philistines by night, and spoil them until the morning light. And let us not leave a man among them. So the day for the new day starts when the sun goes down. So the day was over when the sun went down, and as soon as the sun went down, people started killing animals and eating because they were starving, they were ravished. And Saul sent people out and said, Stop everything. Let's do this right. Bring them all to this large stone. We'll slaughter them to the Lord, then we'll cook them, and everybody can cook. But don't eat the meat with the blood. That's against God's law. Okay, so they did. And as they're eating, Saul says, Hey, let's go by nighttime and let's kill the rest of them. Let's find all the rest of them by nighttime, and let's kill them. And Saul asked counsel of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into the hand of Israel? But God didn't answer him. God didn't give him any answer all of that day. And Saul said, draw ye here nither, all the chief of the people, and know that wherein is the sin that has been this day. In other words, Saul says, all the leaders of the people, come here. I want to know who sinned. Why is God not answering me? If God is not answering me, there's a problem here, something that needs to be repented of. Okay? Now, here's Saul. He's going to say something stupid again. He's going to issue a decree that God didn't give him. And he's going to issue a decree and undermine himself. For as the Lord lives, which saves Israel, though it even be Jonathan, he shall surely die. But there was not a man among all the people that answered him. So he says, whoever sinned, even if it's Jonathan, my son, he's going to die. And then said he unto all Israel, be ye on one side, and I and Jonathan and my son will be on the other side. And the people said unto Saul, do what seems good to thee. So Saul and his son on this side, all the people on that side. He says, which one is it? And they cast lots. It turns out Saul and Jonathan were the lot. Okay? Therefore Saul says unto the Lord God of Israel, give a perfect lot. And Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people were escaped. They were clear. They were indicted. Saul and Jonathan were indicted, and the people were set free of where this problem is. And Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan. And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you've done. And Jonathan told him and said, I tasted a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand, and lo, I must die. So Jonathan accepts his fate. He says, I ate a little bit of honey. I wasn't there to hear your commandment. I ate a little bit of honey, but that wasn't his sin. That wasn't the reason why God didn't answer. His sin wasn't the honey because he wasn't there to hear the commandment. He could not have known, and he had already eaten the honey before anybody even told him about the commandment. That was not his sin. What was his sin? His sin was that he rejected and dishonored his father before the people. And Saul answered and said, God do so and more also, for thou shalt surely die, Jonathan. And the people said unto Saul, shall Jonathan die who has wrought this great salvation in Israel? God forbid, as the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he hath wrought with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, that he died not, for he had wrought with God that day. In other words, because Jonathan had gone forth and fought on behalf of the Lord, had been courageous, the people stood in the gap for him. And at that point, Saul takes his army and they withdraw, and they decide not to go and follow and slaughter the Philistines, which there are consequences later, including Saul and his son lose their life later. So, honor those whom God says honor. Now, I know we can split hairs about whether or not they belong in the place where they are. Many sons would argue that they didn't choose their father. And therefore, they shouldn't have to honor him. God's word doesn't work that way. God's word doesn't work that way. God establishes the Father over the Son, and the Son below, and the Son of the Father, for whatever his mysterious reasons are. so that we learn things, so that we change, so that he can make us into who he wants us to be. And we have to learn to honor, even though Jonathan was not speaking in front of Saul when he said those things. He was speaking in a dishonorable way against his father. And because of that, the Lord was silent. Now, it was Saul's own foolishness that endangered the life of his son and caused his words to be broken before the people. But God saw that as well. God saw that as well and counted that as sin because Saul had made an oath. And so the broken oath was sin before God for Saul. The people stood in the gap for Jonathan. Now, in this scenario, we're the people. We're the people. And there's one who stood for God. There is one out there who stood for God, who was bold and courageous, and who brought the fight to the enemy by himself. And there are some places in which he was dishonorable because he did not know. Because he did not know. And I want to encourage the people to pray for the true president. I want you to pray for him. I want to encourage you to pray for him and stand in the gap. And pray that his eyes will be opened, that his mind will be enlightened, that he will know to honor his Father in heaven, to honor him in all that he says and does, not to take the mantle and to wear it in his own name, but to wear it in the name of God. For I believe, and if you go back through these videos, I have said this time and time again, I believe that the day he publicly declares that this is a fight between good and evil, that this is a fight between God and Satan, that it's not about himself, his person, the day that he publicly announces that and puts the honor with the one who is honorable, everything will turn around. Everything will change. Be blessed, brothers and sisters. Be blessed. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing.